Mr. President.
Senator from Arizona.
As I said when these ill-conceived tariffs were announced last week, that I would introduce legislation that would immediately nullify this very unfortunate exercise in protectionism before it can wreak havoc on our economy. If implemented, these tariffs will do just what tariffs have always done. It will lead to job losses and will stymie economic growth. What's worse, the President's attempt at flexibility in the form of poorly defined exemptions only serves to harm the economy further by creating uncertainty. Tariffs are bad enough on their own. Tariffs married with uncertainty are even worse. Can you imagine the President saying one day, well, I think that Australia is moving in ways that we think are good in this area or that, so I'm going to lessen the tariffs that we impose on steel and aluminum for Australia. The next day, say Brazil. Brazil, if they do this or that, unrelated to these tariffs, I might lift tariffs or lessen the burden of tariffs on that country. But a week later, Brazil takes another move. The President might seek to reimpose or make the burden heavier. That simply doesn't work. If you're trying to achieve economic growth and if you're trying to convince countries to enter into trade partnerships with you, particularly when you're dealing with our allies, that's no way to treat your allies. I understand free trade is sometimes a challenge. I understand that it's a challenge on the campaign trail, certainly. It's often easier to point to a shuttered factory and blame trade or immigration or some other convenient scapegoat. Other than what is usually the case, it's modernization or mechanization or something that has meant that we have increased productivity or simply the best allocation of capital in order to facilitate trade. We've got to aggressively negotiate both bilateral and multilateral trade deals if we're to catch up. If we fail to do this and we continue to withdraw from the global marketplace, we're going to be left far behind. We saw this with regard to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We pulled out of those negotiations, and the other 11 countries involved have simply gone on their own, leaving us behind. This has meant, in particular, countries in Southeast Asia who would like to be part of our trade orbit have no choice but to be more reliant on China. That doesn't serve our interests at all. We have to remember, we represent just 20% of the world's economic output. We represent just 5% of the world's population, or just less than that. If we don't trade, we don't grow. You can be pro-growth, you can be pro-tariff, but you can't be both. So those who have reservations about these tariffs ought to support this legislation that I am introducing today to nullify the tariffs. Those who have expressed admiration for free trade or supply-side economics ought to support this bill as well. Those who are happy with the economic growth that we have recently achieved and are interested in seeing it continue ought to support this bill. We have now a better climate for economic growth on both the regulatory side and the tax side. If we enter a trade war, we risk reversing those gains that we have made. We in Congress simply cannot be complicit as this administration courts economic disaster in this fashion. I would urge my colleagues to join me in exercising our constitutional oversight and to invalidate these irresponsible tariffs. And with that, I yield back.
The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.